only mode.
Welcome to today's Combining Mobile Focus Marketing with Customer Focus Service webinar hosted by Bluebridge and Pattern Service Design. This is the last webinar in our three-part series exploring ways to become more customer-centric in service design and mobile marketing. We're joined today by designer and speaker Troy Thompson. As the co-founder and design director at Pattern, he helps organizations create better services and happier customers. Troy believes in designing for good, fighting for simplicity, and short bios. We also have Santiago Jaramillo presenting today. He is the CEO and founder of Bluebridge, where he oversees the vision, strategy, and progress of the company's mobile engagement platform. He is a nationally recognized expert on mobile and innovation. In 2013, Santiago was named to Inc. magazine's 30 Under 30 World's Coolest Entrepreneurs. Most recently, he was named to Indianapolis Business Journal's 40 Under 40 list. If you have questions during the webinar, please submit them at any time in the question panel, and we will try to answer them at the end. Lastly, today's webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be made available to attendees for later viewing. And now, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today, Troy Thompson and Santiago Jaramillo.
Hi, everyone. It's good to have everyone on the webinar. Santiago, hello to you. How are you today?
I'm doing excellent.
Good.
I'm
good.
excited about today's content and ready to get started.
Yeah, it should be a good one. We'll try to keep it nice and tight here today. We've got a pretty full webinar for everyone, but yeah, we're excited. This is the final out of this three-part series. Jumping right into it, I want to do a quick overview of what we talked about in our last webinar, and we talked really about two big ideas. The first one, that mobile is changing the customer journey, and I'll let Santiago talk about that here in just a second. And then the second one, from my perspective, that service design is changing the way you approach customer needs. And during the last two webinars and during this one, we'll continue to focus in on these ideas that service design is not necessarily anything new, but our customer needs are changing and are something new, and we require new ways to uncover their problems and devise better solutions, better innovations for them. Santiago, from the mobile perspective, you know, like we talked about, mobile does have such a huge impact on the customer journey. Thinking back to the last webinar, what was your big takeaway from it?
Absolutely. I mean, in the first webinar and the second one, we cover these dramatic shifts as far as how consumers are accessing online content, talking to each other, and just the internet in general. And 10 years ago, all of that sort of content consumption happened through laptop and desktop devices, and just in the past half a decade or so, we've totally shifted from laptops and desktops as our main devices in which we experience sort of the online world, but now our smartphones are the lens and the primary device that each of us as consumers on average are using to engage with content, with brands, with organizations. And how that's really changing everything. And so as we look at having customer-centric communication in channels, this massive consumer shift toward mobile is one of the central factors kind of considering this change of how might we better align ourselves and our organizations and our brands around meeting the customer and the consumer exactly where they're at, and many times that place is on their smartphone.
Yeah, exactly. For a quick recap here, last time we talked about two different science centers that were building a mobile app. And we won't continue this journey today, but I just wanted to remind us sort of what we talked about last week. We had a science center on the left and a science center on the right, and they both had a similar problem. They both had a mobile problem, or the idea to create a mobile solution. Again, similar to what Santiago just said, they knew that mobile was a factor, that people were using it, that it was changing the way that they interacted with their science center, and they knew they had to do something about it. But the challenge was that the solutions were unclear, and their peers and partners and employees were unsure of how to actually use mobile going forward. Not everyone was on the same page. When you work with an organization of any size, whether it's 2 people or 200 people or 200,000 people, you have differing opinions of how to implement such a big program, especially something like mobile that touches so many different people. So as we went through it last week, we talked about the different steps involved, and sort of we broke it down into 6 or 7 steps. On the left is sort of a service design approach. On the right is more of an organizational, traditional approach, if you will. And the factors that we talked about here were how you build consensus, build teams, and then identify those solutions based upon the customer and not based upon your own prejudices or your own perspectives. And we sort of went through 4 basic steps, or 2 basic steps out of the 4, identify and create, and then we left prototype and implement for today. And that's what we want to focus on today. Again, the idea is, and what we're all facing out there, is a very fast-moving world, fast-moving technology, changes to our business, and probably most importantly, changes to our customer in a very rapid way. And how do we tackle those problems? How do we actually get people to agree upon project direction, mobile app, support it, use it, implement it, using service design? So that's what we want to focus on today, are these 2 final areas of prototyping and implementation. The first part that we want to touch upon is, how does mobile first become customer first, and how these 2 things are interrelated to each other. Santiago, I'll go back to you. I'd love to hear your sort of perspective, since you guys are the mobile app company and the mobile development company. How do you guys define mobile first? I mean, I'm sure you've seen that phrase used a lot. How do you explain that to your customers and peers?
Absolutely. Mobile first is really kind of a philosophy of how you look at the product design really specifically. And so I think the first thing to note on mobile first is that it's not mobile only, but it's a recognition that Google a few years back actually finally crossed the threshold of more time being spent on mobile versus desktop, and just this past year crossed the threshold of more searches done through a mobile device and through the desktop. And so as Google is thinking about its website, it's primarily thinking about its search product as a mobile first product, because it literally is. People are going to mobile first. And so you as an organization, when you realize that the users are there, building an experience for them that optimizes for their primary computing experience is one of the sort of most customer kind of centric things that you could do, because you're acknowledging that most of them are on the smartphone, and you're cognizant primarily first and foremost of what experience they're having on mobile. It goes much deeper though than just really starting with the mobile interface. It also goes to UI UX elements and navigation. And so, for example, we're so much more impatient when we're navigating apps, and we expect shallow navigation, as in we don't have to click on 12 layers of a folder structure to get to where we want to go. We usually want to get to the place inside of an app in 2 or 3 sort of clicks or touches, if you will. And so really optimizing for the psychology of a mobile user, making things in the app obvious, accessible, essential, and simple. And then lastly, leveraging all of the capabilities, not just of the operating system, but of the actual hardware and device. And so obviously our smartphone is the only device that's really brought together these unique sort of functions, in the sense that it's a GPS, a media capturing tool, both in photo and video, a Bluetooth, a beacon that can interact with location, a professional organizer, a PDA, a calendar, and it's all in one. And so it's leveraging all of those native functionalities of file upload, or pulling in your location, or showing you search results based on your existing location. Those are unique sort of functions that an app or sometimes a responsive site can do that a desktop site or any other kind of device can't actually complete. And so when you think about all the capabilities that are unique to a mobile first approach, it allows you to dream a little little bigger with what's possible, as showing search results contextually located with somebody's location is very possible, if not easy, on a smartphone, but impossible, if not difficult, on a website, on a laptop. And so when you kind of put this lens on of seeing your product as primarily being accessed through mobile by your consumers, and thus what you can best do to be consumer and customer centered is have a good experience for them there, it opens up your eyes to think about the solution design and from an entirely different place, and it really starts at the very heart of what does the mobile experience look like, and then let's build from that and build depth rather than build depth and comprehensiveness on the web and then try to narrow it down and scale it back to fit mobile first. It's really kind of the order of how you go about it, but that order is paramount as that the process you run ends up significantly impacting the solution that you create.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, is that the catalyst for all of this change really is the mobile device. And you know, we could spend a couple of hours talking about the history of the UI UX and how people are now interacting with their phones and how that's changed from the desktop, and go all the way back through all the different media devices that we've gone through. You know, whether that's radio or TV or DVD or mobile phones or the computer. So yeah, I think that really is the catalyst, and the way that ties into the service approach is very closely connected. When we look at a sort of a chart like this, and we talked about at the beginning of this session the idea of prototyping and implementation, there's a little wheel or a little repetitive cycle that happens within service design that's borrowed directly from mobile, and it's sort of subconsciously borrowed from mobile, if you will. And Santiago, I'd love to hear your perspective on this when we explain it. Is, you know, we have, like, starting at the top left of the wheel, create, prototype, implement, and then working our way around to feedback. You know, this is a pretty typical cycle for something like mobile app development. You might create the idea, you might run a prototype, you might test it, test a couple different versions, implement it, gather feedback, and go back around the wheel and keep repeating it and keep repeating that process. And this is something that's very intuitive for designers, for development organizations like Blue Bridge, whether that's mobile web or applications or, you know, the internet in general, quote unquote. But this isn't an approach that's very well known to the larger business community, or just regular businesses, if you will. Most of us don't approach other problems in our business this same way. We approach mobile this way, but we don't become a customer-focused organization in all aspects of our organization. How many of us built our brochure, or our new visitor center, or a new exhibit at our museum, or the way we run our admissions into the university? You know, how many of us actually go through this type of a cycle where we create it, we prototype it, we implement it, we get feedback, and then we go back through the cycle in a rather short order, in a span of weeks or maybe months at the most? And I think we see this, and we're being trained on this behavior, but we just don't know about it. This is 2 screenshots from my iPhone from this morning, and you can see on the left there, I've shoved all the Apple stuff into the back of my phone, including the App Store, where it's got the little update icon for me, and it says there's 3 updates for my applications today. And then on the right, it shows you those 3 updates. And I thought this was an important thing to consider, is that we as a society are being trained to respond to service design and rapid prototyping and updates to the things that we use. I mean, you can see right there, for Duolingo, the application that I use to learn German, they're on version 4.5.2. Twitter's on version 6.38.1. We've gone through multiple versions, and we update our phones constantly with new apps and new versions of apps, because the app developers are following that cycle. They're following a mobile-first approach, but then it quickly transitions into sort of a customer-first approach. The customer's gone back, provided feedback, say, hey, you know, Twitter, this was broken or that was broken. We need to fix it right away. And we all know what happens if they don't get fixed. If the app that you were using doesn't work, or is working in an unexpected way, or won't help you, you quickly move that app to the back of your phone or delete it or not use it again. Santiago, what do you think about that? I thought this was a fascinating example of how the general public is sort of being trained on this idea, but we don't even know it. We're being sort of shown that what a mobile first approach looks like through the App Store update system.
No, absolutely, and it was tremendous, Apple's ability to get users to adopt their new operating systems, and so they saw how powerful that was in their ability to get people to download the new version, and they wanted to give that same capability to app developers, and so they enabled automatic updating. And so now most of us, when we're connected to Wi-Fi, our apps are updating themselves all the time without us having to sort of download an update. And when we look at where software has come, this is truly a revolutionary shift in what's happened. When you think about when the new sort of Windows Vista or Windows XP would come on, right? How difficult it was to sort of download that, and many times you couldn't download. You'd literally have to buy a CD, right, or a DVD or a USB drive and get it sent in the mail. You plug it in physically to your computer. You have to reboot the entire thing, and you're into a whole different experience. It's not incrementally different. It is at many times completely different. And so what this does is it sort of batches innovation into much faster but smaller cycles, which is much closer to what iteration does. It also reminds me of what Tesla's doing, right? So today, and for the history of car production in the United States, a car is produced, and none of its software or hardware is truly sort of upgraded through the life cycle, right? So if you bought a car in 2000, your car dashboard and your radio looks like a 2000 design with the best available technology in the year 2000. It doesn't get better, it doesn't get updated unless you take it to a mechanic and totally put in new equipment. Tesla cars now have this ability to actually get rid of defects as well as enhance suspension and enhance the braking algorithms, because there's so much electronic and software technology inside of the car that through the internet Tesla can essentially give an operating system upgrade to the car, and now the navigation system is more accurate, the air conditioning control is a bit more subtle and more powerful at the high end, and it's this amazing capability to iterate faster and sort of complete those innovation loops and that flywheel faster and faster, which incrementally produces better products that are more aligned with customer fit as you're getting feedback on these small tweaks versus having to wait years for these massive overhauls that are fairly time intensive and distracting for the organization and are many times complete guesses at what customers want, since it's not being built on an iterative get feedback, iterate, get feedback type of model, or at least not nearly anywhere near as frequently. It's fascinating to think about this and the kind of the global perspective of how do things, objects, software, products get better over time. And certainly this App Store experience there on the slide is showing how mobile apps are in some ways kind of leading some of the charge in that kind of continual improvement innovation life cycle model.
Yeah, I mean, you could absolutely see this where, like you're saying, that the example with Tesla is excellent, but you could see this easily apply to, you know, other appliances in your house, things that we've always thought of as like you said, we buy it once, that's the model, then it runs for 10 years, and then we give it away, like a washing machine or a refrigerator. You know, this sort of experience of updating the software or the application or whatever it's going to end up being called is not going to go away. This is sort of the forerunner. This is, again, the training for how we're going to function as a society. And I don't want that to be more of a futuristic sort of look at something like, wow, that's really neat, but how does it apply to me? I think the way we want it to apply to the people that are on this webinar today and those that are listening on the recording is thinking about the things that you do as a business right now and what things are out there that are like that, where it's a legacy sort of program or system. I think about, obviously you and I, Santiago, do a lot of work with tourism organizations. I think about the big visitor guides that we print, and that sort of process takes 18 months, right, between developing the content, printing it, distributing it, and then let it run for a year and then replace it. I mean, that feels so antiquated in comparison to something like this. And I think that's the idea here when we're talking about how does mobile focus turn into customer focus. Mobile focus is just and mobile apps and mobile development in and of itself is sort of just that precursor, right? Like that first wave that sort of starts changing your organization. And there's going to be more that follows behind it. And if your organization isn't set up using an approach like service design to actually take advantage of that and use this type of a cycle to go through and constantly test, update, implement, gather feedback, do it again in a faster and faster cycle, you're quickly going to be left behind. I mean, you absolutely wouldn't think of, somebody like Twitter putting out an application, seeing that there was a major error involved in that application, and then waiting, we got to wait 6 months now for our development cycle to catch up. It's like, no, they'll fix it within a day or two, and I can't remember the exact version, but it seemed like that happened with, I don't know, what are we on, like iOS 6 or iOS 9? One of the Apple versions that came out a few years ago had a pretty big bug in it, and they literally fixed it the next day and pushed it back out. And to your point back about Windows Vista, had that happened with Windows, and it probably did, 10 years ago, it would have taken them 3 months, 6 months to actually develop a patch and then update it and do all the stuff that's involved. So I think that's the big takeaway here is that these things aren't just whiz bang cool like Tesla or like the App Store, but these are forerunners and sort of previews of how we're going to function as a society going forward and how we need to adjust our businesses and the way we operate going forward. And it just so happens that mobile is that first iteration of it. Let's talk about, as we finish the presentation today, we want to talk about 5 rules for you guys to sort of take with you to talk about this new way of approaching problems and approaching challenges. We want to break it down into 5 simple rules for doing this type of prototyping, implementation, gathering feedback, some quick tips, if you will, that you guys can take with you. The first one, or rule number 1, is involve everyone and do it right away. I know this is a big thing for the team at Blue Bridge and for Santiago. It's a big thing for us here at Pattern. When we do workshops with clients and tackle these sorts of big problems, we involve everyone right off the bat, because involving 1 or 2 people means that now I've got to not only talk to those 1 or 2 people, but now I've got to wait for that one person or my contact to go back to the CEO and get her feedback, and maybe go to the board of directors and get their feedback, and that might take 2 or 3 weeks, and then it'll get back to her, and then we need to edit it. I'm currently going through one of these situations with one of our legacy clients. A project that should have taken about 30 days is taking 3 months because they weren't all there in the beginning, and we've got to slow down and explain it to people and continually go through that process. Just to give you guys a quick visual, this was the attendee list from my last workshop. We did a workshop with a university client, and this is what the attendee list looked like. We had 23 employees, we had 7 stakeholders, which were people outside of the university itself. We had 3 residents of the town that the university was in, and then we had 11 quote-unquote customers, or actual university students, participate in the workshop. So it was a very much an all-encompassing workshop where it wasn't just limited to the senior staff or the VP level. It was, let's get everyone involved that's going to be affected by the project we're working on so that we can get that feedback now and move through this process much, much quicker. Santiago, how do you guys tackle this when you start projects? When you start an app development, I'm sure you fight for the same thing, getting as many people, as many stakeholders, decision makers involved as possible to make that process go faster.
Absolutely. Harkening back to some of the content in our previous webinar, I know we start with understanding the problem deeply and isolating problems into as many simple components of those problems as we possibly can. Once we've defined those problems, kind of unique set of problems or just one unique problems that matter most, we'll prioritize those to end up with, what problems are the ones that we know we have, or that our customers have, whatever we might be solving for, and then we prioritize those. After we do that, then we immediately sort of involved the broadest swath of the team that we possibly can to begin understanding their perspectives. And it's amazing what a customer success manager, their ideas compared to a business development manager ideas. What one focus is talking to prospects all day long, one person is talking to customers all day long, and then another person is building the product all day long. And their perspectives give this richness of worldview and perspective and diversity of perspectives that truly allow all of the sides of the problem to be fully fleshed out, understood deeply, and then the most breadth of ideation and divergence possible. Then from there, once we sort of hit diminishing returns on divergence, that convergence kind of narrowing down to the best solutions that kind of meet the criteria to best meet the problem are kind of evaluated, all within this group concept though. And so really involving folks really early versus kind of finding the solution and just getting buy-in later is something that takes some boldness, confidence, and humility all at the same time to not just sort of be set on what you think the solution might be right from the start and sort of justifying that decision and just convincing everyone else for it, but truly sort of being vulnerable enough to say, let's all find out what the answer is together and work toward it together. And the level of buy-in, the level of diversity of perspectives, the quality and quantity of the ideation, and then the clarity of the conversions down into the best solutions possible. That is achieved through this kind of multiplicity of perspectives, which is really, really important to bring in early in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about the idea of, the whole quote of asking for forgiveness, like, just go ahead and start that, we'll ask for forgiveness later. Well, I hate that idea. I mean, I really do. I mean, it's such a detriment to your customer and to the organization, and I know the temptation is there, like, oh, we can see what the problem is, we can jump right on it, let's get started, let's get something going, and that temptation is really strong, and it is difficult. It is a lot of work to bring together a workshop and this many disparate people, and like you're saying, Santiago, bring together a big group and have them discuss this problem all together. But we find that pain in the short term is relieved in the long term, because then we've got people that are quite literally all on the same page, know what the problem was, know what the solution is. We don't need to go back and catch up Jim from marketing, or we don't need to go back and catch up Kathy, the CEO, because she was there at the first meeting. And we've already talked to a customer, so now we're not surprised when we hear from customers when we first start prototyping it. So, there's certainly some work in the beginning to sort of take this approach of involving everyone up front, but it certainly pays off. So that would be the first rule for you guys. The second rule to take away from this one is do, don't talk. And this talks all about prototyping. And prototyping, I think when people think about it, they think it's very high-end. They think about 3D printers or wireframes or stuff like that. And that's really not what it is. We've done prototyping projects, and Santiago, I'm sure you have too, that are as simple as a storyboard, a drawing, putting something down on paper and showing it to your customers and saying, hey, do you think this makes sense? Like, if you could go through this and use this website, where would you have trouble? Where would it be easy? What problems would you run into? It's fascinating to watch people run through a website on paper, like literally slide pieces of paper in front of them as they click and touch on new things with just their finger. But it's really, really powerful because it helps us get to answers quicker than jumping ahead and starting to build. So prototypes can look like storyboards. Prototypes can be Legos and little models. This was a project that we put together again for a university client, and we were kind of talking about physical space, so that's why there's models and little Lego people and stuff. But again, the idea is to involve so many people at this step, at this part of the process, that we work out some of these challenges. And then sometimes it actually shows up in very rough, rudimentary mock-ups. This is something from a peer of mine. They were designing a new classroom application for a professor to adjust and control lighting and sound in their presentations. And as you can see, it's a fancy piece of cardboard, but it's still a piece of cardboard with a very basic printout and some very basic controls. Those are little bottle caps over on the right-hand side that just show people what the physical prototype looks like, and we're able to determine, does this solve the problem? Is there a new problem that arises before we actually jump into development? Santiago, from the mobile side of things, I'm sure wireframes are key for you guys, but what else happens on the prototyping side from a mobile perspective?
Sure. I think many times the magic begins happening once you get to that prototype stage, and the customer or an early set of kind of early adopter customers that might are some of the ones that are blurring the lines of kind of taking your platform and set of functionality to its very edges of its limits. And those folks figure out how to use kind of the product in a really creative way. And so for us, getting product and prototypes and early features in the hands of customers and then letting them give us feedback on how they're using it. Many times they solve different problems with a functionality solution that we initially thought, and maybe the initial problem that we thought would be solved doesn't get solved at all, but there's actually a more valuable problem that we unintentionally or accidentally solved for. So that level of feedback from kind of real people using it out on the field, especially the early adopters that are thinking about it in an innovative way, can many times significantly alter the shape of the type of functionality and solution or service that we end up designing. So that's been incredibly helpful and challenging to us to think through to make sure that we're doing this as often as we possibly can.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting part again is so many of these things have been pulled from a mobile perspective or a web design perspective or a technical from a technical place, and we're used to seeing wireframes or beta sites. There's nothing abnormal for us using the beta version of iOS 9 or the beta version of this program or that program. So we're training ourselves to be used to that. But how do we take that again outside of the technical space and use that same approach when we're designing brochures or visitor guides or physical spaces, or how we enroll someone in a university, or how we sign someone up for an annual membership at our museum? How can we take these same prototyping ideas that we think work fine and are completely universal in a mobile space and apply them to a non-mobile space? And again, this is the idea of how mobile first turns into customer first. By using some of these techniques and tools, now we're again putting the focus on the customer and using these types of prototyping methods to really get feedback from the customer right away before we spend all of our budget building something that we're not quite sure the customer actually needs or wants. So that's the second rule. The third rule, implementation is not the end. And Santiago, we talked about this when we were developing this presentation, and we talked about the idea of sort of build it and forget it applications. And you were telling me the story of how you guys really fight against that in terms of build it and forget it. Why don't you give us that perspective? How do you guys approach it from a mobile development standpoint and make sure that apps aren't forgotten about?
Sure. Yeah, we really during implementation we truly talk about our phase one implementation, and that is really helpful and helps customers achieve clarity in their priorities and most important objectives for why they even rolled out a solution in the first place. And so we really encourage our customers to narrow the focus of their phase one to kind of the most essential elements, and for them to get that out in the wild, in the hands of their app users as soon as possible. What's amazing is after that, you have so much more insight and data and perspectives on the effectiveness of the solution. You know, what parts of the app they might be accessing more through, you know, watching folks use it or asking them what value they're getting. You're getting suggestion box ideas and input that you can take. You're using it, you and your team are using it yourself to do whatever the app is meant to do. And all of a sudden you have all this richness of perspective and these learnings from seeing the phase one product and implementation out in the open that significantly impacts the phase two. And many times in phase one, we'll scope out what we think the phase two looks like. Then invariably, nearly every time, the phase two ends up being different than the phase two that we thought would happen at the implementation. Mm-hmm. That live feedback from users, from you using it, from your team using it, and gathering all those perspectives and opinions can help actually significantly impact the phase two in a totally different way that is actually going to be a lot more valuable to the organization in its accomplishing of various objectives than kind of the initial hypothesis for phase two. And so with our product offering, we realized that customers sort of needed our active help in doing that sort of iterative process. And so we included services along with our subscription where a dedicated customer success manager works with every customer to, on a quarterly basis, revisit the app objectives, take a look at the app functionality and how it's accomplishing that, and then changing the tactics, the functionality, the features, the promotion tactics used to better achieve those objectives. And so what we then had to head into is how can we make making changes to our apps easier, because if you know how mobile apps work, many of the changes actually require an entire resubmission to the App Store, which can take hours and hours of a technical resource's time, and for Apple at the very least takes a week to 2 weeks of waiting for Apple to approve that app. So then we had to build capabilities for our customers to be able to edit their apps almost completely and entirely, change them, their content, the structure, the layout, the navigation, really change any part of the app and not have to resubmit. And that was such a valuable addition to our platform, because it really allowed our customers to totally continually iterate and decrease the time from a phase one to a phase two to literally minutes or hours instead of weeks, months, or potentially even quarters. And so it was such an interesting sort of flow for us to be totally committed to help our customers iterate in that kind of phase one, phase two, phase three approach, really focus on user feedback to drive the criteria and the requirements for the next phase. And then it was also interesting how that commitment to provide our customers that actually sort of forced us to innovate on their behalf by making app iteration easier for them and really cracking this idea of app dynamic content, where all of the content and all of the structure and all of the layout of an app is dynamic and can be modified on the fly in real time through our mobile app studio. And so that is, I mean, this sort of this phased approach, this continual iteration and innovation concept is one that it's at the very core of the Bluebridge solution design. It's integrated into our product and into our services, so that from the customer-centric perspective, we are lowering the barrier and the friction for them to continually make their app better and better, so that it can better accomplish the goals that the organization has for the app.
Yeah, and I mean, that sounds, I don't know, I don't want to say that sounds a little selfish, but I mean, it's very smart of you. I mean, you guys obviously have a product and a business, and your job is to make that as customer-centric as you possibly can. And like we were talking about earlier, if your app isn't able to respond to the needs of your customer, to be able to update their app, change it, modify it based upon their own customer needs. If it's a tourism bureau and their customers have changed, well, they need you to be able to change their app to respond to that. They would leave you. They would go to another app developer. And that's, again, a very, it's a very personal example, but it's a very clear example of, this idea of changing mobile first into customer first. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is this idea of mobile first and customer first versus organization first. And as you were talking through the process there at Bluebridge, I was very pleased that you were following my rough diagram here that I drew out the other day. And mobile first, customer first looks like the loops on top, right? It's a constant loop and constant cycle that continues to repeat itself. Where organization first, if it was a project like, let's say, we use the example of building a visitor guide. If we're building a print magazine, we're doing it once. There's a big run-up of innovation and information and work in the beginning, and then it just sort of trails out, and eventually we get to next year, or when we need to replace it, or the thing finally runs through its life cycle. And I think this is a very easy visualization for a lot of you on the webinar today. This is what customer first, mobile first looks like. It looks like the constant loop-de-loop roller coaster approach to things, where we're constantly going back and repeating ourselves. The other thing that I thought of when you were talking about your example there, Santiago, is how much we're being trained now to expect our feedback to make an impact on the thing we're providing feedback to, right? It's very odd for me now to go into a brick and mortar business and possibly provide feedback like, hey, this is broken, or hey, this needs to be addressed, and not see it addressed right away. Like if I come back in a week later and see that it hasn't been fixed, in my mind I immediately go, why wasn't that fixed? Why didn't they take care of this? And I think again it's this mobile first approach that we're becoming so used to, where if an app is broken, if a website is broken, if something on the technical side is broken, those things get fixed and addressed very quickly. If you owned a Tesla and there was something wrong with your brakes, you're downloading the update that night. And the fix is happening right away. And I think that gets applied to, again, a lot of these brick and mortar sort of situations where it's like, why wasn't this fixed? Why wasn't this actually addressed? And that begins to frustrate your customers. Rule number 4, we talked about feedback already, and we sort of sprinkled it throughout our conversation, but rule number 4 is get good feedback and do it constantly. 2 quick slides here for you guys. The tricks to getting useful feedback. They're nice and simple. Always ask for it. Always ask for feedback. Never ask yes or no questions. Yes or no questions are worthless. They don't tell you anything about what the customer is thinking. They don't give you any insights. Do not ask yes or no questions. Ask customers and non-customers constantly. Don't just send out the survey to the people who have visited your museum or walked into your visitor center. Go out and find people that didn't walk in the building, that didn't come into your museum, and find out why they didn't come in. It's harder, it's more difficult because you don't have their email address sitting right there in front of you, but you can do it and it's important. And then 4th, only ask only ask for what you need. So a quick story here for me. I was down in Charlotte, North Carolina a couple of weeks ago. I needed to rent a car. I usually always rent a car from Avis because I'm somewhat loyal. Car rental rates in Charlotte were ridiculous this time of year, and I was like, forget it, I'm just going to rent through Priceline and do it that way. I ended up renting through Priceline and got my rental car for something like half the cost. I think it was going to be a $400 rental car, and I got it for $200. And I thought to myself, after I got done with that process, after I went through Priceline and then they gave me Hertz, that Avis is never going to know about that situation. They still think I'm a loyal customer, but they're never asking me, or they don't regularly ask me, hey, Troy, have you rented with anyone else in between renting with Avis? Like, because we can see from our customer side that you've rented 2 times in the last 3 months. But if you rented with anyone else, this whole idea of asking non-customers about their experience. And this is the feedback I wish, and the survey I wish Avis would have sent me. Was your last car rental with us? Yes or no? And then based upon that yes or no question, immediately ask them why not. The yes or no there is simply to get them to fill out that why not section and fill it in. And that's the real key here. Avis should have known and should have asked me why I didn't rent with them this last time I went to Charlotte. And I would have told them that it was ridiculously expensive, I didn't need an upgrade, all I needed was the most basic car, and maybe that provides them feedback for actually improving their service. But they don't ask me that question. They follow a very typical pattern where they only ask me for feedback once they know I've actually engaged with their product or their service. And that's fine, and it's good to ask for that feedback, but we also need to ask for feedback from people who maybe haven't engaged with us for a while. Maybe we need to ask feedback from people who we know are not our customer and ask them, why are you not our customer? An important way to gather feedback as we continue to go forward. And again, to continue this cycle. The fifth and final rule that I would say for you guys is meet and repeat. Repeat this process. As Santiago and I have talked about, especially with mobile app development, it's very clear. But I think with becoming a customer-centric organization or customer-first organization, it's important that these cycles are repeated constantly, that you bring the group back together, that they meet about it, and you repeat this process. Again, remember that looping roller coaster sort of line. That's what it should look like. It shouldn't be a long-term, let's wait another year to figure this out or another 2 years to figure that out. We need to constantly be meeting, evaluating feedback, and then applying that feedback to the services that we provide people. Because if our services aren't up to date and aren't what the customer expects, they're going to go somewhere else. Santiago, final thoughts from you on that one, meet and repeat?
Absolutely. I think the more cycles you can spend here, and harkening back to kind of this last slide as well, many times you get to the true sort of golden insights by asking several why questions deeply. And certainly you can accomplish that through kind of conditional questions on an online forum. But whenever it's possible or feasible or worthwhile to do, having a kind of that one-on-one conversation with someone, and then when you kind of get at an insight, digging in more and asking several why questions deep can many times get at the kind of the highest level of abstraction and simplification of the challenge or of their true thoughts or the true value of this solution for them. And so it's just not only the breadth of the perspectives that you get, like we've talked about, and diversity of perspectives, but also the depth and how sort of deep you're able to go with people into really truly understanding their insights. And like you said, yes, questions provide limited visibility into that insight, but those open-ended questions, especially why questions, can be immensely insightful into truly getting into those golden insights that will truly influence the end outcome, the end solution, that strategy that the customer is going to end up implementing.
Yeah, I think about it. I have a 5-year-old, and she constantly asks me why questions. And part of it's a game, but part of it she's serious. She wants to know why things are happening. And I always phrase it as, you should approach innovation, you should approach problems, you should approach your customers with the same mentality as a 5-year-old. Relentlessly simple questions. Continue asking them simple questions to get to the bottom of it, because we are a very irrational creature, and even in things that are simple as, why did you use this mobile app? Why did you get on this bus? Why did you go to this destination versus that destination? Asking that why question continues to get to that very, like you're saying, clear insight. All right, that will wrap it up for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate your participation during this series. For those of you who are perhaps joining us for the final webinar in the series here, if you missed any of them, you can listen to all of them online. You can go to bluebridge.com/patternwebinar. The whole series is up there. You can flip back through them. For me and Santiago, if you need to contact us or are interested in contacting us and following up with a couple of questions, feel free to do so. My contact information is on the left, Santiago's is on the right. Tweet or phone call, we would be happy to chat with you. And with that, we'll take some final questions. But Santiago, anything else from your end that you want to add before we wrap things up here today?
This kind of flywheel of innovation and service design, and really focusing around the customer, it's a muscle, it's a competency. It's something that can be learned and something that can be improved, and we can each improve our abilities and our team's abilities to sort of successfully complete that innovation and iteration cycle. And so, I would just say a word of encouragement to folks listening to give this a shot, not give up if it sort of takes a direction that might confuse or that might look like an endpoint, but really kind of keep at it, as this is something that can be learned, can be honed in, and can be improved over time. And the more that our teams run through this process, the more of a culture of innovation and customer-centric design that we build, the better we get at it as individuals, and the better our teams get at change management and really continually evaluating every piece of our product and our services to make sure that it's pointed and centered around customer needs first and foremost.
Yeah, I would agree. And thank you, everyone, for hanging out with us today. I think hopefully our message has come across nice and clear. Mobile is sort of the leading edge of this. When we talk about mobile first, what does that actually mean? But there's a clear connection with how mobile is now pushing into more of a customer-first approach, and how you can actually get to that point by following these 5 rules. Matt, any questions from the audience, or are we good to go and we can wrap things up?
Yeah, we have one question. It is, well, we actually have 2. The first one is there a concern that putting out a prototype will negatively affect your brand, knowing that it will need to be iterated on and it needs improvement, or is there a concern that it might turn away those early adopters?
That's a good question. Santiago, I'll let you answer it too, because I think I'd be interested in your feedback. But no, when we put out a prototype, like the models that we've shown in the slides today, it's not something that we necessarily let people walk away with. It's a very rough prototype. They can see it's a rough prototype. In certain situations, there's no branding on it. Maybe we don't want people to know that it's company X or company Y testing this out. Often the brand isn't really what we're trying to test. We're really trying to test the functionality and the service experience. So that's one way of preventing it. The other thing that I would say is that for a lot of the people that we involve in those sort of prototype tests, again, they're used to it. They understand the idea of beta. They understand the idea that it's a prototype and we're testing out something new. I think if this approach would have been tried 15 or 20 years ago, yeah, there might have been some negative consequences because people would just not have been used to it. But I think now, again, we're sort of being trained as a culture and a society to be used to, the idea of beta apps or a beta project, or working with something that's maybe not completely done, but that we have influence on and can provide feedback to. I think for a lot of people that we use, or a lot of people that participate in prototype projects with us, they're excited that they actually get to give input to a big brand like Warner Brothers or like Visit California. They're excited to be a part of it and not necessarily looking at it from the standpoint of, oh, it's a negative. So yeah, I would say it's not a negative as long as you're clear with the participant that's using the prototype. Santiago, how about you guys? Have you seen any negative pushback from that side of things?
I think there's a way to manage that concern, and I think one of them is by communicating the proper expectations, and then number 2 is follow through. So I think number 1, sharing with folks what you're doing. This is an early test, that feedback is warranted, that you're aware that this isn't a final sort of polished solution. Could make him set the right expectations for somebody to come in with an open mind and to go into it being willing to give feedback based on whatever favorable piece or unfavorable pieces of it they experience. And then number 2, I think folks are even more happy to give feedback and to see sort of phase 1, V1, minimum viable product type stages, specifically if they see you follow through with a V2 and actually make that iteration based on the feedback. So if you can communicate, here's the feedback we got from a version 2, here's how we incorporate it into the V2, please give us more feedback so that because we'll actually use it to build the V3. If you build that trust that you're actually going to do that with the folks that you're getting feedback from, it builds this tremendous sort of rapport with them and this trust that stays with them for a while. So Certainly there can be negative consequences of that, but I think if managed appropriately, the benefits, the consequences can be significantly mitigated, and the benefits of it in actually coming out with a great customer-centric solution that will work sustainably is much, much higher, and is totally worth that minimal risk, even if that minimum, especially because that minimum risk can be mitigated significantly by setting expectations and having clear follow-through on the iteration.
Yeah, and I think you'd be surprised how many people are open to that. I think that's a big fear for a lot of people is oh, we don't want to show it to someone until it's perfect, right? We don't even like doing that with our coworkers, right? I mean, it's difficult to show your boss a draft of something because it's like, well, I don't want them to think that I'm dumb or not smart or it's going to affect my personal brand. But again, I think customers are more open to that than we give them credit for. We sort of underestimate their capacity for that. And as Santiago said, I think you got to be there with them. I don't think you just give it to them and let them run around with it out in the wild. The important part is the hand-holding, not only to take them through the app or the prototype, but also to be there to hear the feedback. If you just give it to them and let them do it on their own, you're missing a huge opportunity to get feedback from them by participating with them or walking them through the prototype itself. Matt, one more question real quick.
Actually, we're all out of time. We'll go ahead and answer the question in the follow-up email, but we have about 30 seconds left.
No worries. Then we are good to go. Thank you guys for joining us today. On behalf of Santiago and Blue Bridge Digital, we really appreciate your participation in this three-part webinar. On behalf of myself and Pattern, we really want to thank you guys for being part of it. I hope you have some great takeaways, and we will speak to everyone soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.